observed previously during the quarter ending Q4 2012-2013, Q4 2013-2014, when growth was around 5%. This has been on account of both exogenous and endogenous factors. The government is quite alive to the situation, especially global headwinds arising out of deceleration in the developed economies and Sino-American trade conflict has contributed to the slowdown. Quarterly indicators report short-term changes in the different economic parameters, and it is important to note significant upward trends in electricity and power generation, which has grown by 8.6%, as per IIP, among other indicators. What we must definitely take into account here is that typically world over, electricity and power generation is a good leading indicator, and therefore its growth by 8.6% compared to 4.3% earlier is definitely something that we should take note of, which may indicate, together with the growth in credit at about 12%, may indicate that there are some green shoots towards a higher growth rate. Alive to the imperatives of achieving the target of $5 trillion economy, as well as the need to handle the short-term situation, Government of India has been taking proactive steps. They reflect in the recent announcements made by the Honorable Finance Minister and the decisions taken in the Cabinet meeting regarding further opening up of foreign direct investment, as also many other measures that include banking sector reforms such as mega mergers of banks, the recapitalization, governance reforms in banks, transfer of liquidity from banks to NBFCs, the housing finance companies, reforms related to market access for financial participants, and the resolve of the government to further develop the bond markets. Simultaneously, efforts are being made to speed up capital expenditure provided for in the budget. At the same time, monetary authorities have also taken necessary steps to improve the growth impulse by lowering the interest rates. Steps are being taken towards transmission of these rates. These measures not only remove bottlenecks in the path of growth, but also show quick response of the government after extensive discussions with all the stakeholders, which will continue in future as well. The underlying robustness of the Indian economy is borne out by low inflation, which must be emphasized, focused spending for the common man, and the continuing resolve and momentum on the reform path, especially structural reforms. The Government of India remains committed to retaining its glide path on the fiscal deficit, which is an indication of fiscal and monetary strength. Thank you.
So one quick question. So with the manufacturing at the lowest, do you think there is, what do you think is the reason behind it? And secondly, considering that we are seeing a GDP at a 25-quarter low, do you think there is a need now at least to give direct stimulus to the economy to see growth coming back in the system?
So as I had mentioned in my opening remarks, there have been earlier phases as well when the growth rate was around 5%. And the government, as I just mentioned, is taking all the necessary steps, both in terms of the short run and in the medium run in terms of structural reforms, to take care of the situation.
And what do you think is the reason behind the manufacturing decline?
So I think, as we had highlighted in the economic survey as well, that the investment rate has had declined, but it must be mentioned that the investment rate now seems to be actually picking up. I must just mention that there is basically, in fact, for instance, the capacity utilization is increasing now and is now comfortably above 76%, which is, I think, an important part, along with what I mentioned in terms of the electricity and power generation as a leading indicator. So we would expect investment to be growing, to be picking up. So that's something which we expect in the forthcoming quarters.
My question is, many of the people, experts are of the opinion that whatever the government is trying to do are structural reforms, they will take some time to show the effect. So anything in the immediate future that we could expect from the government, because clearly we have also mentioned before, and the government is saying that doling out is not something that the government is very keen on doing. So anything immediately we can expect so that the economy is back?
No, I must actually highlight that last week the Honorable Finance Minister had actually announced a slew of measures, many of which were focused on the addressing some of the immediate aspects which are basically which I've talked about. Therefore, the government is very much alive to both what needs to be done in the short run as well as the structural reforms that are required in the medium to long run.
So in your opening remark, you said that you talked about the 5 trillion economy, and the growth rate is already, requirement for that is 8%, the run rate actually. So where do you see in the next quarter the run rate going to in terms of the GDP in your estimation? Because there's a series of steps that have been taken. You think you'll be able to meet that target for this year? Or is it that there is something more drastic that is required at this stage to help spur economic growth? Because 5% is something which is a real shocker.
So as we had highlighted that what is critical for that 8% growth rate is the investment. I must bring to the attention that the budget had focused explicitly on investment, 100 lakh crores of infrastructure spending, which also has the ability to crowd in investment. What we must recognize here is that this is, in order for the $5 trillion, we basically need an average growth rate of 8%. Given some of the, the sort of green shoots that I've spoken about on the investment side, on credit growing about 12%, I think these together we should, hope that and actually be confident that the increase in the growth rate will start manifesting in some time. That is something which actually one will have to wait and watch. My sense is that we have, as I've mentioned, we have been in earlier periods, growth rate of 5%, but we've bounced back from that. For instance, the 2 quarters that I mentioned, even in 2002, for instance, the government is taking all the necessary steps that are required, and so we should be back to actually the high growth path very soon.
Sir, with growth rate of 5%, do you hope that this year will cross 7% or will be whether will be below 7%, and which are going to be growth driver for the coming quarters?
So I think this is still the first quarter. So and as I've just already mentioned that there are some green shoots which should start accelerating growth in the quarters that come by. We'll have to wait and watch.
7% mark, sir. 7% mark. Whether
I think it will be very hard to sort of speculate on that particular aspect. I would, as I said, the steps that are being taken by the government should have a definite impact in accelerating the growth path, and we will, right now we're actually sticking to those forecasts, and we'll, go by as things go.
Manoj, the first glance at the numbers clearly show that large part of the slowdown is due to fall of growth in private consumption expenditure. Now, all investments, everything, you talked about this. Investment is pretty okay. Now, what do you plan to do with this private consumption expenditure? The mood in the street is of despondency. There's a gloom everywhere. It's shown in all the consumption.
In denial mode.
It looks like we are in denial mode. Basically.
I think we must actually acknowledge here that the words that you're using are typically associated with periods of recession. We need to be very, very careful here in what we are talking about. There's a slowdown, but we still are at 5% in a global economy that is actually not doing very well. So let's be careful in the way we actually use some of these words. 5%. Remember, the economy has still grown at 5%. Now, to come back to your question about consumption versus investment, I must actually mention that as we had shown in the economic survey, for an economy like ours, it's investment that actually eventually then drives economic growth. Consumption is a force multiplier. The fact that investment seems to be picking up is good news, and we should certainly acknowledge that.
But thank you. Depending more on government expenditure, government investment rather than private. If there is no private consumption expenditure, there won't be private investment. And its story has been going on for years.
And we are very satisfied with 5%.
I think we've made it very, very clear that the $5 trillion economy is our target. So, and we definitely want, are aiming at that. So I don't think I would actually, characterize your statement the way you've said it. We certainly are, ambitious enough to achieve that $5 trillion goal, for which the growth rate actually of 8% is required. So we continue to maintain that. And let me also add that the regarding your question, government expenditure, especially on capital and the steps that were announced in the budget, has the effect of crowding in private investment. The fact that in private investment, as you were mentioning, is doing well, together with the impetus that would come from some of this crowding in, should actually accelerate the virtuous cycle which the economic survey spoke about.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can we get a copy of your statement?
No, ये आ रही है WhatsApp.
Yeah, exactly.